The laughter started before the lawyer even finished reading the will. Daniel Mercer sat at the far end of the long table, staring at the document in front of him, while the rest of the family struggled to hide their amusement. 70 acres, one cousin said, shaking his head. He gave the wasteland to the orphan. Another relative leaned back in his chair with a smirk. That sounds like old man Mercer. Strange to the very end. Daniel said nothing. He looked down at the line again. Parcel 42, 70 acres of land located west of Dry Hollow. Ownership transferred to Daniel Mercer. That was it. Everything else had already been claimed. The ranch house went to his uncle. The cattle business went to another cousin. The farm equipment had been sold and the money divided among the rest. But Daniel got the land nobody wanted, the wasteland. The lawyer cleared his throat. The deed will be finalized this afternoon. A woman across the table folded her arms and smiled coldly. So what are you going to do with it, Daniel? Build a palace in the dirt. A few people laughed. Another cousin added, you'll be lucky if weeds grow out there. More laughter followed. Daniel calmly folded the document and rose to his feet. I'll take it, he said. The room quieted for a second. You're serious? His cousin asked. Daniel gave a small shrug. It's land. Dead land, the man replied. Daniel did not argue. He simply nodded to the lawyer and walked out. As soon as the door closed behind him, the laughter started again. He did not look back. Dry Hollow sat nearly 30 miles outside the town of Ridgewood. The first stretch of road was paved, but after 10 miles it turned to gravel. By the time Daniel reached the property line, the road had become nothing more than two dusty tire tracks cutting through dry hills and rock. He parked his old pickup beside a rusted fence post and stepped out. The relatives had not exaggerated. The land was bleak. The soil was pale and cracked. Scrub brush clung to the ground in scattered patches. Stones covered the hills. Not a single large tree stood anywhere on the property. Only brittle grass bent under the dry wind. Daniel climbed a small ridge and looked over all 70 acres. No crops, no water, no buildings, just empty land. Well, he murmured, at least it's mine. Daniel had spent most of his childhood in the Ridgewood County orphanage. His parents had died in a construction accident when he was 9. For a short time, the Mercer family had taken him in, but that arrangement did not last. It had been easier for them to send him away than to make space for him. Over the years, Daniel had learned something simple and painful. When people expected nothing from you, they never had to feel disappointed. And right now, nobody expected anything from 70 acres of wasteland. Over the next few weeks, Daniel spent most of his free time out there. He had no grand plan. He just liked the silence. The quiet of Dry Hollow was different from the noise of town, different from the crowded orphanage halls, different from the tension that always followed family gatherings. Sometimes he brought a folding chair and sat for hours watching the sun sink behind the hills. Other times he walked the property line, studying the ground. If the land was truly worthless, he wanted to know why. One afternoon, near the center of the property, he noticed something strange. A patch of earth on a rocky rise looked too smooth, too flat. Daniel crouched and brushed away the top layer of dust with his hand. Beneath it was metal, dull gray, solid. His pulse jumped. He hurried back to his truck, grabbed a small shovel, and returned. Within minutes, the shape began to reveal itself. A large rectangular steel hatch buried beneath years of dirt. Daniel stopped and stared. Well, that's not normal. The hatch was massive, roughly 6 feet long and 4 feet wide, with thick hinges on one side and a heavy circular handle at the center. It was old but clearly man-made. He cleared the remaining dirt, wrapped both hands around the handle, and pulled. At first, it refused to move. Then the hinges groaned. With one final effort, the hatch lifted. A rush of cold air rose from the darkness below. Daniel stepped back. Beneath the hatch was a concrete staircase descending into the earth. He stood there, staring. What in the world? He grabbed a flashlight from the truck and returned to the opening. The beam cut into the dark and revealed concrete walls, metal railings, and a stairwell leading down. This was no abandoned well. Someone had built this. Daniel hesitated only briefly before heading down. The temperature dropped with every step. The air smelled dry and metallic. At the bottom, his flashlight swept across a sight so unexpected that he froze where he stood. A massive underground chamber stretched before him. Concrete pillars held up the ceiling. Metal storage racks lined the walls. Crates sat stacked in careful rows. And at the center of the room stood a huge steel door that looked more suited to a bank vault than a bunker in the middle of nowhere. Daniel turned slowly in stunned silence. 70 acres of worthless land, and buried beneath it was this. But the strangest part was not the bunker itself. It was how intact everything looked. Dust coated the floor, but nothing seemed ruined. The crates were sealed. The ceiling lights still hung in place. Near the vault door sat a steel desk. On top of it lay a single envelope. Daniel walked toward it. His name was written across the front. Daniel Mercer. He stared at it for a long moment, then carefully opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter. The first line made his heart skip. Daniel, if you're reading this, it means you found the bunker your grandfather built. Daniel read the line twice. He had never met his grandfather. In truth, he had barely heard the man mentioned. The Mercer family rarely spoke about him, and never with warmth. Now here he was, standing inside a secret his grandfather had buried beneath land the rest of the family considered useless. He kept reading. If you found this bunker, then the land is finally yours. And that means the rest of the Mercer family underestimated you, just as I hoped they would. Daniel frowned. That was no accident. The letter went on. For years, the family fought over money, livestock, and the ranch. None of them ever paid attention to Dry Hollow because they believed it was worthless. That made it the safest place to hide what mattered. Daniel lifted his eyes and glanced around the chamber. Apparently, his grandfather had known exactly what he was doing. He read on. I bought this land 60 years ago because I discovered something beneath it, something worth protecting. During the Cold War, the government quietly built underground storage facilities across the country. Some were abandoned. Some were sold off privately. Dry Hollow was one of them. Daniel slowly turned his flashlight toward the walls and pillars again. Suddenly, everything made sense. The reinforced concrete, the industrial design, the vault-style door. This had not been some homemade bunker. It had once been part of something much larger. The letter continued. When the government shut this site down in the early 1960s, they left behind materials and equipment they did not want publicly documented. I purchased the land through a private sale and sealed the bunker. Everyone thought I was foolish for buying 70 acres of dust. I let them think that. Daniel let out a faint breath. The misunderstanding had lasted for decades. Then he reached the next part. Inside the vault are sealed crates containing rare industrial metals and specialized equipment. At the time, it was strategic stockpile material. Today, it is worth more than the Mercer Ranch above ground. Daniel slowly looked toward the steel vault door. His grip tightened on the letter. The last lines were steadier, almost softer. But money was never the true reason I kept this place. I kept it because I believed that one day someone in this family might need a second chance. If that someone is you, then use it wisely. Daniel lowered the letter. For several moments he stood in complete silence. Then he walked to the vault door. It was enormous, with a heavy steel wheel fixed at the center. He gripped it and pushed. Nothing. He planted his feet and tried again. This time the mechanism groaned. The wheel slowly turned. A deep metallic hiss echoed through the chamber as the seal broke. Daniel pulled the door open. His flashlight swept across the room inside. Rows of wooden crates filled the vault. Metal containers were stacked neatly along the walls. Many still bore old labels. He pried open the nearest crate with a crowbar he found nearby. Inside were heavy rectangular bars wrapped in protective paper. He lifted one, dense, cold, surprisingly heavy. Stamped across the side were two words, tungsten industrial grade. Daniel stared at it. He opened another crate, titanium rods, another, rare earth metal ingots, another. Sealed containers labeled as beryllium alloy components. Crate after crate held materials used in aerospace, defense, and advanced manufacturing. Daniel sat down slowly on the edge of one crate, trying to process what he was seeing. This was no forgotten junk cache. It was a buried fortune. He pulled out his phone and searched quickly. The numbers on the screen made his heart pound. Tungsten sold for thousands per ton. Titanium alloys could be worth far more. Rare earth materials, depending on purity and type, could reach astonishing values. He lifted his head and looked around the vault again. There were dozens of crates, maybe hundreds. He stopped himself. The scale of it was too much to grasp all at once, so he climbed back up the stairs, stepped out into the evening light, and stood there in the wind. The hills of Dry Hollow stretched quietly before him, 70 acres of worthless land. Daniel let out a quiet laugh. They really had no idea. The discovery did not stay secret for long. Within weeks, engineers and materials experts arrived to inspect the bunker. Government officials reviewed the records. Lawyers traced the purchase documents back decades and confirmed the truth. Daniel's grandfather had acquired the land legally, along with the contents beneath it. That meant everything now belonged to Daniel. When the first full valuation came back, even the attorneys were stunned. The bunker's contents were worth nearly $80 million. Suddenly, the Mercer family wanted to talk. One afternoon, Daniel walked into the Ridgewood diner and found 3 relatives waiting for him. His cousin Mark waved him over with forced friendliness. "Daniel, good to see you. Sit down." Daniel remained standing. "What's this about?" Mark exchanged a glance with the others. "Family matters." Daniel looked at him for a moment. "Family?" Another cousin leaned forward. "You know, we didn't mean anything by what we said at the will reading." Daniel said nothing. Mark cleared his throat. "We're just saying. Maybe there's a way to work together now. On the property, investments, partnerships." Daniel almost smiled. 8 years in the orphanage. 8 years without visits, without support. Without any of these people caring whether he had enough. And now they wanted partnership. He folded his arms. "I think I'll manage." Then he turned and walked out. A year later, Dry Hollow looked different. The bunker had been secured and preserved. Some of the metals had been sold to licensed industrial buyers. Some Daniel kept as long-term assets. But he did not spend the money on luxury. He spent it on opportunity. Just outside Ridgewood, construction crews completed a new campus. Workshops filled with equipment, classrooms for engineering and technical training, labs for welding, construction, and advanced trades. A large sign stood at the entrance. Mercer Technical Institute. Daniel stood by the gate on opening day, watching students arrive. Many of them came from backgrounds like his. Kids with talent but no support. Kids who needed one real chance. An older foreman from the construction crew stepped beside him and looked over the campus. "You know," the man said, "most people who find $80 million underground buy yachts." Daniel smiled faintly. "I wouldn't know what to do with a yacht." The foreman laughed. "Fair enough." Daniel looked toward the distant hills of Dry Hollow. From the outside, the land still looked the same, dry, harsh, empty, still easy to dismiss. But beneath it had been the thing that changed everything. "They mocked the land," Daniel said quietly. The foreman nodded. "People usually mock what they don't understand." Daniel watched the students disappear into the buildings, hopeful and nervous and ready. Then he looked once more toward the horizon. For the first time in his life, he understood something deeply. Sometimes the most valuable things in the world are hidden where no one thinks to look, even beneath 70 acres of wasteland.